Right, so in this video, we're going to prep our unwrap models that we've done in Rhizome and get it ready for texturing inside Substance Painter. So all of these models should be unwrapped. For some of these little pieces that you might have, we're just going to automate it. So things like the eyes and these little eye bits that I have and the Tusk are simple enough that I'm just going to automate it. Plus, I don't want to do it manually. So, okay, so let's jump into ZBrush. So before we get started, the main body, which we've done manually, and that's the one that has the 4 Udemy tiles, we need to import into ZBrush. So this is my sculpted mesh, and this is my manual retopo. So what we need to do is just come into here and press import. Find that OBJ that we've unwrapped, and then import it in here. Now there's a good chance that it will be off. So if this is my sculpted mesh, it might be like down here or something like that. And it might be, I should have done that. It's too high poly to do that. Yeah, it might be like really small. So in this case, all you need to do is just the sculpted mesh. You just have to eyeball it, right? So bring it into place, scale it up, and make it line up as close as possible. So scale it up, whether you just use the green handle, the blue handle, or the red handle, whatever you need to do, just scale it up or down to make it fit. So it's got to sort of fit on top of the sculpted mesh as close as possible. Okay. So what you need to do then, and I'm just going to go to my geometry and bring the subdiv all the way down. So it might look something like this, where you're sort of lining it up as close as possible. And then in your subtool palette, just have only the sculpture and the retopo mesh visible. So the eyeballs are visible, nothing else. And then you want to make your first initial projection. So if it's slightly off, the initial projection will just make sure that it's as tight as possible and it's wrapped as closely as possible to the sculpted mesh. Now, I'll talk through the steps, and there's quite a few steps that we need to go through. I don't have it written down or anything. It's just sort of coming from my head. So explaining it can be a little bit tricky sometimes, but what we're going to be doing here is we have the retopo mesh. So I might rename this so it's a little bit clearer for you guys. Okay. And this is the sculpture. So let's just rename this to original. OG. Okay, so that's the original. And this is the retopo. So I've imported this and I've lined it up and scaled it up as close as I can to the sculpture. So this is the one I've been working on up until now. And I've done an initial projection to make sure that it is as close as possible to the original sculpture. Now what we need to do is basically project the high poly, or project the retopo onto the high poly. So we have a retopoed mesh at subdiv level 1, and this contains the UVs as well. And the highest subdiv basically contains all the sculpted information. So going into Z plugins and then using the multi-map exporter, we're going to use this method to get the displacement out, as well as the normal map. So doing this method allows us to get a super high quality displacement map and super accurate displacement map out of ZBrush. It will be way more accurate than anything that Substance can do in terms of the displacement map. And we do this because we can export out a 32-bit, which is a super high information map. So our eyes can only see around 23, 22 bits of information. So there's all this information within this 32-bit of map that we can't actually see. So it's really high quality, and we're not going to get that anywhere else. And to do that, we need to extract that from the highest subdiv level. In my case, it'll be 7. Right, so we need to take the details from the sculpted mesh and project that onto the low poly. So all you're going to do is you can do this in solo mode. So I have my retopo mesh, and up here I have the original mesh with the eyeball turned on. So you're going to do the initial projection, then subdivide it. So we'll go up to 2, project. Then you're going to subdivide, project, subdivide, project, subdivide, project, and you'll continue this process until your retopo mesh contains the exact same details as the original mesh, right? So you can see if I toggle between the two, it's going to look pretty much identical. Now, on your last projection, right, turn blur all the way down. And just do this for the last one. You don't need to do this for the other ones because it'll take a much longer to project. But the last one that you do, which you kind of have to do a bit of trial and error, is to make sure you turn blur down, and that will give you the closest possible projection you can get. Okay, so I know I can't go any further, so I can't project any further than this. I can't subdivide this any further because I'm looking at 41 million polygons with this one. If I subdivide, it will go over 100 million, which ZBrush doesn't allow you to do without going into Sculpt HD. So that's how I know that that's my last projection. Okay, so once you've done this, there's going to be a bit of cleanup work. So look for any errors on the mesh. Now I can see some here already, and I haven't done any cleanup work. So I'm going to spend some time doing that and fixing that up. Now it won't be on both sides sometimes. Sometimes it's just on one side. And you're looking at this sort of stuff here. I got some around the eyes, I think. Oh no, I don't. That's good. It's not as nice as it could be, but you know, if it does get picked up in the render, which I doubt because it's really small, if it does get picked up, I'm just going to fix it in post. Okay, so check areas like this. The armpits are usually an area that sort of breaks. That's pretty good. That's fine. I'm happy with that. You can see here it broke a bit, and this is the part that broke a lot, is over here. So if you remember in the last video, unwrapping in rhizome, I had a bit of overlapping, which I sort of ignored, but really just led to that. So a bit of cleanup work. So let's spend some time cleaning this up. If you don't have anything to clean up, then great, skip ahead. But I'm going to show you how I clean this up. Now, when you do this cleanup, there's no doubt going to be a bit of re-sculpting. So just keep that in mind. And first, I'm going to take this all the way down to subdiv level 1 and just work at this level. I'm I'm going to have symmetry turned on. See if I can smooth some bits out now. And when you move up the subdiv level, it sort of kind of fixes it up a little bit. So you want to do this level by level, and ideally you should do this cleanup as you're projecting. So project, check the mesh, clean anything up, then project again. But I didn't do that. So I'm just going to do it all towards the end. So just clean this up. So I'm just going to smooth this out a bit. These sort of levels don't really matter. It's only the last level that actually matters here. So let's go up again. Smooth this out. And what I'm going to do is actually, I'm going to isolate this. I'm going to press Control Shift, change the brush type to a lasso, and just see if I can grab that, just that bit. Sometimes it's easier to work on the inside of the mesh. So come close to the area that's a problem and smooth that out. And to be honest, I probably could have avoided this part if I just fixed it the first time when I was retopoing this. But that's okay. It doesn't take that long to fix. So just come into here, smooth these parts out. I know I'm going to have to resculpt some of these bits, so I'm okay with that. I'm just going to smooth that out and then go back up. And it's going to mess up again. It's just not going to be as bad. So just come into here, smooth these bits out. Let's go up. Oh, okay, so smooth. Now, if the smoothing is, so as you go higher in polys, the smoothing doesn't work as well because there's just so many polygons to work with. So you can go to the light box and then go to brush, scroll all the way to the end, and you can find the smooth folder. And then you can use smooth stronger. That will replace the shift smooth with the new one. And like the name suggests, it's a much stronger smooth. So if it's getting a bit too hard to smooth because nothing's sort of happening because it's too dense, then switch over to smooth stronger. And like with these sort of things, you want to go right to the tip and then smooth it down. That. That's the easiest way to smooth any sort of like spikes like that. Try to smooth all this out. Get that nice and clean for us to work with. So we need to do one more and this is going to be all messed up. That's okay. We'll just come in and smooth all that out. So you can see like it looked pretty bad, but it's fairly quick to clean up. Again, I know I have to do a bit of resculpting here, so that's okay. It's not really an area you're going to look at anyway, so I'm just going to do this, sculpt some of the wrinkles back in that I had back here, and then continue to prep it for Substance Painter. So with this video, what I want to do is to make sure that we can have all our subtools in the one substance file. That will make the texturing process a bit more clearer because we have everything in there instead of just having multiple separate substance projects for each individual subtool. Now that's at the highest subdiv level. So, oops, there's one over here. And there's one over here. So I'm pretty much done. I just got like 1, 3, 4 spikes to go. Try to get that to behave a bit more just by going over it. Okay, so that looks pretty good. I'm fairly happy with that. You want to check both sides because the errors aren't going to be exactly the same. And I'm going to take symmetry off and just work on this other side a bit more. Try to smooth that down as much as I can. Okay, so I'm happy with that. And let's go back to my brushes. And I've got that geo brush that I'm going to work with. And make sure symmetry is turned on. I'm not going to spend too much time here. So if you want to skip ahead, just go for it. All I'm going to do is just bring back some of these wrinkles. I'm going to be pretty quick with it. I don't want to spend too much time on this, to be honest. So I'm going to be pretty loose and might not even do the tertiary shapes here. Just sort of bring back some of these wrinkles like that. I don't really want people looking at this part anyways. So, okay, then let's use a standard brush to push some of these wrinkles out a bit. Back to that geo brush. And we'll do some larger ones. Cross these over a bit. And we're done. Okay. Alright, so there was only one other area, which is over here. And this will be very easy to fix. It's only a tiny little bit. I'm just going to do that in the highest subdiv level. So there's only a little bit to work with, so that should be fine just to do that in the highest subdiv level. Okay, so let's try to pinpoint exactly what's going on. So it's just here, a bit up here, and down here. Okay, so let's smooth that out. Sort of pinching around here. Sort of crossing over. Okay. And let's go to the other side. Great. That looks good to me. I'm going to leave it. I'm not going to do any resculpting on that. Partly because really you're not going to look at that area. I hope you won't be anyways. And I think that's pretty much... Oh yeah, there's one little bit in the mouth. So we'll do that. And then I'm pretty much done. And I think it was just on one side, so it wasn't even on this side. So let's see if we can isolate that a bit more. So it's just this one spike. Oh, it was on this side. So one little dude. Make that smaller, that brush. One tiny little dot. Okay. I think that was it. Now I'm just going to check inside the mouth sac, and I'm just going to grab half of the mouth like that, just to check inside. And if one side's good, I'm sure the other side will be fine. That looks fine to me. And then I can just hold down Control Shift, drag a little thing in the open space to invert that selection. And yep, that looks good to me. So I'm pretty sure that was it. So I'll bring everything back, and then we can move on to prepping this for export. Okay, so I got these extra bits here. So let's just hide all of this and bring back these eye bits. So these two guys are going to get out of solo mode. To clean this up, what I'm going to do is just merge some bits that we could just easily merge. So these, the front eye bits and the back eye bits, we can just make eye bits, right? So I'm just going to merge these two together. So merge down. So they're one thing. And I'm just going to rename this to eye bits. So eye bits. So they're pretty high poly for just, little eye bits like this. So I'm going to press Control W to give that one solid poly group. And they're not very nice in terms of its topology. Okay, so let's make a copy of this. And then this one here, we're just going to run a Z-remesher on top of it. So we want to make sure we have nice, clean models to work with. So let's just go half, and that's it. And then we'll run this all the way down, and we'll reproject it back onto the other eye bits. So that looks fine. We're at 25. We can definitely go a lot lower. So I'm happy with these little bits being higher poly, because I don't really want to spend too much time on this bit. And I know that's going to work perfectly fine. Not as optimized as it could be, but again, it's going to work fine. Okay, so this is going to be the low poly of these eye bits. So I'm going to just run a UV master on these things, and then we'll be done with it. So we've got the UVs for these bits, and then I'm going to do the same for the tusk as well and the eyeballs. So I'm just going to save it. So press Control S, and let's run the UV master. Okay, so Z plugins, bring that over, and we want to work with the UV master. It's advisable to work on a clone, but this is very low and simple. We don't need to do a clone. Let's just press unwrap, and hopefully that will be fine. So it's going to work up here. Okay, so that's good. So we can flatten this to take a look at it, and that's what it looks like. Great. All good. So that's ready to go. What we'll do is we'll just do the projection. So we'll bring back the OG. So I'm going to rename this OG so I know that that's the original, and this will be the retopo. So we won't rename this because we're going to have to do some renaming a little bit later, but let's just subdivide. So let's project first. Turn colors off, project. And we'll probably only need to do this once or twice. So press Control D to subdivide, or press this button here, then project. Then one more time, project. So I think if I solo this out and look at both things, Like it looks exactly the same. The projection actually looks better. Okay, so that's good to go. Let's move on to the next bit, which will be the Tusk. So I've got two of these. So the big ones and the small ones. I'm going to do the same thing. So let's merge these two together. So let's press merge down, press OK, and then we'll rename this. So we'll copy this and rename it. So I'm just going to press duplicate and then rename this to OG so I kind of know what I'm looking at. And then this one, let's just run a Z remesher. Okay, so I'm going to solo it and let's jump into our Z remesher and let's just go half. With these bits that have like long pointy sections, you might want to have adapt on. So if you think about fingers or anything like that, you might want to keep this on. But let's just run it without it. And I'm going to put this margin right there. And when I press Z remesh, if it sort of shrinks a bit too much, I might put adaptive back on. But I'm going to have these like fairly high because I don't want to manually retopo this. So we're looking at 200,000. So let's just keep going. So these don't have any UVs on it. So that's why we're doing this. Let's go again. So we're keeping the shape quite well. So it looks like we can go pretty low. So at 16,000, let's see if we can go down one more time. Okay, that looks good, right? So again, we'll just come back up to here in the Z plugins and just run a UV master on top of it. I feel like it's going to be pretty low for us to just run it, but I'm going to save it just in case. So Control S and just save that. So you can imagine if your creature has like teeth, you'll probably want to do this to like the teeth. All right, so let's go unwrap. It's going to do its thing. Then we'll just double check it by flattening it, and that looks fine. Okay, that looks good to me. So unflatten. And then we just go through the same process. So we bring back, so that's OG Tusk, which is fine. So we can have it in solo mode. So we do the initial projection. So that's what we're going to be bringing into Substance. And then we press Control D or this button here to divide, project all, and just repeat. These simpler sort of shapes, you can power through them pretty quickly. And it should just work. The last one might take a little bit longer. We're at 2 million. So this is the 2. So we're in solo mode, so I can just go to the original. And that's the projection. Lost a little bit of detail. But on the last projection, I might re-project with blur turned all the way down. See if we can get a bit more detail back. I don't really want to subdivide again. So let's just check this. Okay, I'll subdivide one more time. So Control D, and let's press project. So then all we got to do is the eyeballs, but we don't need to do any sort of projections. It's just going to be a ball. But we do need to unwrap it. Great. Okay, if we're not going to get exactly the details we have before, we're not going to get any more by subdividing. So that's close enough, and it's pretty close, almost identical. Okay, so that's done. The last thing that we got to do is the eyeballs. So this is what it looks like. I'll bring back the sculpture, and yeah, they're completely off center. So the Tusk will be the same as well. So before I do this, I'm gonna just bring it back into position. So hold down Alt if you need to center it, and press this button and just bring it back to where it should be. Because through resizing, when I bought the original, when I bought the Retopo in, I just had to move things around. So just move things back if you need to. Something like that. And the Tusk will bring this back as well. The OG ones we don't actually need anymore, so we don't need to move them back. We just need to move the ones that have the UVs, the low poly, and the high poly all in the one subtool. And I'll move that into place. Okay, so it's pretty much there. Okay, now last one was the eye bits. So I'll bring that into place. Where are my eye bits? Here. Okay, so bring that into place like that. And that looks pretty good. I think it's a bit high. Okay, great. So the last thing to do was the eyeballs. So with this, we don't really need to do much. All we really need to do is just unwrap it. So I'm going to press Control S to save. And then we'll unwrap the eyes. So I'm going to isolate it by going down here to the solo button. And then let's just run the UV master again. Okay, let it do its thing, then we'll flatten. That looks fine. Look, it could definitely be better, but whatever, that would work fine. I do have some random, actually have some random bits here, like an extra line, so I might run a zero mesher. And I don't like this, so we have a pole at the top and at the bottom. So I'm just going to run a zero mesher to clean that up. So we'll just do same and just run a zero mesher. That should fix that up for us. Okay, I'm much happier with that. So then let's go back to the UV master, and then let's unwrap that again. Okay, so let's flatten that to see how that looks, and that looks fine to me. And then let's unflatten. Okay, so we'll bring everything back. So get out of solo mode, make sure everything is there. All right, so we have pretty much everything ready to go. I'm going to save it, so Control S. So what we need to do now is we need to export the high poly as well as the low poly for Substance Painter. But then we also need to do the displacement bake inside ZBrush for the body and Tusk and anything else. So for me, I'm really only going to export the displacement map for the Tusk and the body. I'm not going to worry about the eye bits and the eyeball because there's not much there anyways. So let's just get the displacement map out of the way, and we'll do that one at a time. So where it says OG, the OG bits, we can just put in a new folder. So I have a section for old, but I'm going to make a new one just for OG bits. And we're not going to ever touch these again, to be honest. We could actually delete them, but I kind of don't. I don't like deleting things. So let's put all the OG bits in here. So we're just left with the retopo that has a UV that has been projected. Okay. So we can hide all of the OG bits. That's kind of done. We're done with that now. We don't actually need them anymore. So we're going to export the displacement map from the body and the Tusk as well. So we'll do that now. So let's highlight the sculpture, the body, and then let's jump into the Z plugins, and we're finding the multi-map exporter. Now we just want the displacement and the normal maps from here. So make sure these two are both turned on. And scroll down a bit. So map size, 4K. Make sure all of this is default. File name. We want to make sure that the UV tile ID format is set to UDIM. Now it doesn't actually matter what it is at. Maya and these softwares are smart enough to know what's what, but the typical workflow, I guess, is to have it set to UDIM. That's a more common naming convention. So we'll do UDIM. So if I open up export options, we can go to the options for each of these things. Okay, so let's start off with displacement map. So subdiv level will be the max subdiv level of this model. So we're at 7. So I'm going to make this 7. For this, I'm going to smooth the UVs for everything. So let's smooth the UVs. You don't have to, but I'm going to because you get nicer results. It's a more typical workflow. Mid, I'm going to have that 0. Some people like to work at 0.5. Which is nice because you have a lot of leeway both ways. But just to make the process a little bit easier going from here to Maya, because in Maya, mid is at 0 by default, I think. So we don't need to mess around with changing anything. It should just work. Turn 32-bit on. If you want super high, a super high map, you can turn this on. Although we're working with TIFFs, so it should be fine. But if you want to work with an EXR, then you can turn that on. Scale and intensity should be left at default. Do not touch them. So it should always be 1 and 0. So normal maps, open that up. Same thing with the subdiv level. Change that to whatever your model is. We want to work with the local space, so turn tangent on. And then we'll smooth the normals, and then we'll also smooth the UVs. And that should be fine. We're not going to export the mesh here. We're going to do that in a different way. And then now let's press X, create all maps. So I'm going to create a folder that's going to house all of these maps. So just texture maps. We're going to be working with quite a lot. So just keep that in mind. All right. So I'm going to rename this to body underscored and just press save. It's going to do its thing. Depending on how detailed your model is or how many polygons you're working with, this can take a bit of time. But it should only take a few minutes at most. So just let it run its thing. Cool. So we're at the normal maps now. And then we'll take a look at the files once that is done. I'm pretty confident that it should work. And if it doesn't work, we can always re-export this out anyways. So we won't test it. Although if you want to test it, then in the auto retopologizing and organic sculpture, towards the end, there's a testing part of it. So taking it back into Maya so you can test it out, see if it's actually going to work. I'm pretty confident that it will, so I'm not going to test it. Okay, so we're working with a multi-tile workflow. So we're going to do a displacement map and a normal map. We have 4 tiles, so it's going to go through this process 8 times. So what I'm going to do is just mute my mic. I'm not going to pause the video because I don't want to crash the system. I'm just going to let it run. So if you want to skip ahead a little bit, then go for it. Okay, so we're done. So 3 minutes, pretty good. So I'm just going to check that it is in the area that I've exported all of this to. Okay. So it was in a folder called texture maps. So here. Great. So it's all there. Looks good. I'm happy with that. That looks correct. It should look similar to this. If it doesn't look like this, it doesn't necessarily mean it didn't work. All right. So just keep that in mind. The only way to actually know if the displacement didn't work is testing it inside Maya. You can't actually tell by looking at it because there's a lot of information in this map that we can't physically actually see. So you just got to keep that in mind. I'm pretty confident that's going to work. Okay, cool. So we've got the displacement map and the normal map. All right, so now what we've got to do is prep this for Substance Painter. So what we're going to do, because we have multiple pieces in here, we need to have the low poly and the high poly renamed a certain way. Now, the kind of annoying part, I guess, is that we can't, the high poly and a low poly is in the one subtool. So subdiv level 1 is the low poly, subdiv, whatever's the highest, is the high poly. So it's easier to just copy all of this. So duplicate every single one of them and set 1 to the lowest and 1 to the highest and rename them. So what I'm going to do is create a new folder. New folder. That was weird. Okay. So I'm going to call this low poly, low underscore poly. And then I'm going to put all of these guys into the low poly. Now I need to rename all of these. And whilst I do that, before I do that, I'm going to reduce the poly count all the way to 1 for every single part. So Tusk, we'll do that as well. Bring that all the way to 1. And the eye bits, bring that all the way to 1. And there's no subdiv levels on the eyes. So we've got to rename this. And it's very important that we rename this exactly how I show you. because substance picks up the suffix of these subtools and then matches them up with the high poly. So if they're not the same, then substance is not going to know what to do with them. So we're going to rename this. You can keep it exactly the same. I'm just going to take retopo out because we don't need that anymore. And I'm pretty sure it's all lowercase. We'll see. We can always change it later. So just low, like that. So Tusk, let's rename this. Let's not have any spaces. So if there's a space, then just put an underscore. So Tusk, low, and rename the I bits. So I bits low. And then eyes, rename to eyes. Even though we don't have a high poly, we still need to bake it. Let's go low. Okay, so we got the low poly. Now let's create a new folder, duplicate all of these guys and change the slider to the high poly and then rename it to whatever underscored high. So I'm going to select the I and create new folder and just call this high poly. And I'm going to press duplicate and then bring back the low poly into the low poly section. And I'll rename this now. So let's go eyes underscored high. Whoops. Add a little thing in there. And then we've got eye bits. So let's copy this, then bring that one down to the high poly folder. Then rename this to high. And then we'll come down to the geometry and then increase the subdiv level to the highest. And then we'll do the same thing for the Tusk. So we'll copy that, bring that down to the high poly folder, rename it to high. I did it again. And then we'll change the subdiv level all the way to the highest. Okay, and last one, so the body, we'll copy that, bring that down to the high poly folder, then rename that to high. Then we'll change the res to the highest subdiv. Okay. Oops. All right, so we'll do this one at a time. All right, so that's all set up and that's all set up. So we'll start off with the low poly. So we'll just hide the whole folder, the visibility. So we only have the low poly stuff visible. So let's go to Z plugins again, which I have up here. And we're going to use the FBX export import option. So we don't want selected, we want visible. And if I open up the options here, just turn anything that's pressed in off. So nothing's pressed in, right? And then we'll press export. Okay. I'm going to have it in the same folder as texture map, but you put it anywhere that you need to have it. So let's just press, don't rename it, just keep it as is. And then just press save. So this is going to export an FBX, but within the FBX is going to have all the different bits to it. Okay, so then let's hide the folder for the eye. The folder for the low poly. Let's enable the high poly folder. Make sure sculpture high is selected. And then we'll go back up here and then we'll export this again. Settings the same, except this will be the high poly sculpture. This high poly one will take a bit of time. Okay, so on mine, it's probably going to take about 10-20 minutes maybe. So what I'm going to do, I'm not going to pause the video because as soon as you touch the computer as ZBrush does its thing, it's going to potentially crash. So I'm going to mute my mic, going to make a cup of tea, and then just fast forward until it's done, okay? All right, so that took forever. But hopefully that worked. So I'm going to bring up Substance Painter and then we can get started with the baking. Okay, so we've got Substance here. Let's create a new file. So file new. Then we're going to use this as a template. So PBR, metallic roughness, alpha blend. Go to file, and then we want to select our low poly. All right, so we're always going to select our low poly. Okay, so press OK. Change the document resolution to 4K. Now it's important that we have this turned on. So we're using UDIMs. So make sure we turn this on and turn off these two. And then press OK. So we can check that it's worked just by going into here. So it doesn't look like it worked. Oh no, it did work. Okay, so if we go to the texture sets, we can scroll down a little bit and you can see that we have ibits 1 tile, ibits, the actual eye, the sculpture itself. So that's 4 there. And then we got the tusk, which is made up of 1. So let's go into the toolbar and go all the way to the right where we have this little croissant. And it's important that we make sure we have our texture sets. Okay, so we want all of our things inside ZBrush in. So we want all of these guys inside Substance. So sculpture low, tusk, eye, and eye low. And they're all here, which is good. And they all have the correct UDIMs. So let's import our high poly. So let's go to output size. Let's change that to 4K. And then over here where it says high definition meshes, we can press this little paper button. And then we want to put the high poly in. Now this might take a bit of time because it's quite high in detail. So just let it do its thing. It only take a minute or two, but it will take a little bit longer than like your low poly meshes. So whilst that is importing, what we need to do is you can see here that we have the high poly mesh suffix, right? So we change that all to high, so underscored high, and the low poly is underscored low. So that's correct, so underscored low. Matching, make sure that's always set to by mesh name. So this little error is going to come up, right? And that's because the high poly is not imported yet. But once that has imported, Substance should be able to read all the things, all the different subtools within that FBX, and then match it based on this suffix, right? So as long as the suffix is the same, then it should be fine. If it's slightly off, then you can just come into here and rename them, but they just got to be consistent across the different subtools. So I'm going to mute the mic and you can just move ahead once that is imported. All right, so that's done now. It's come in good, so there's no more errors. So you can see that it's matched it up nicely for us, which is good. So I bits low is matching up to I bits high, Tusk low, Tusk high, I low, I high, Sculpture low, Sculpture high. Now what we're looking for here is any red bits. So any sort of red bits that you have, you want to sort that out now. So if you see any red bits, all you need to do is just increase slowly the max frontal distance. This will be this cage here, till all those little red bits go away. And I don't have any red bits, which is good. But often you will have some. Okay, so that's fine. So let's just go to bake selected textures. It's going to do its thing. It might take a while because it is a pretty high poly mesh. So again, I'm going to mute my mic and I'll come back when it's done. Okay, so that's done. Let's return back to painting mode and hopefully there's no issues. Okay, so just give me a time to think. All right, so we're in Substance now, the paint mode, and so far, so close. I must have that area not properly done. So I'm back in rhizome and it was this part here. So let's just select that bit. And that looks fine. So let's see what the issue is. So let's jump back into here. And let's just see if everything is fine first. So besides that, let's take a look. So that is good. No issues there. Inside the mouth looks good. The underside looks fine. The toes looks fine. Fingers look good. And that looks good. Okay, so let's test what is going on up here. So we have the low poly sculpture. The first thing I'm going to do is just got a layer here and I'll scroll down. So I'll bring this over here like this. Change the color to like a red and let's just paint. So it's not painting at all. So there must be something wrong with the UV. So let's go 3D and 2D. So where we're at over here. Okay. So I wasn't using this one. So I remember I'm using this other one that I've done. So this one here. No, not this one. What is it? Maybe it's this one. Let's just load with UVs. This one here that I exported out of ZBrush. Can't remember which one I did. Okay, so let's say load. All right, so we're working on the body. So it's this one here. And there were issues right at the top of the head, which is about here, I think. Okay, so I didn't unwrap this part of the head. Okay, so I know what the issue is, which means that I have to unwrap the head, then go back into ZBrush, do all of this again just to this low poly sculpture, then re-export the low poly, and then redo this substance painter stuff. So I know the issue. It's my fault, obviously. But let's just pretend we didn't see that. So let's go to 3D only. It is working perfectly fine besides that part. Let's just test it out with some of these smart materials. So let's just put this creature texture on, which is, these creature textures are a solid base starting point. So let's see how they look. It should react to the low poly as if it's the high poly. So that's doing its job perfectly fine. Let's hide the body and we should be able to see everything else. So that is good. If you didn't want these things to have the shadow in your bake settings, you can do like ignore back faces and stuff like that, but I'm not going to bother with that right now. because I'm never going to hide the body anyways. Everything looks good, so let's just make sure that we can paint on the tusk and all the other bits. So we have a red paint here. It's thinking, so I'm going to let it think. Okay, that's good. Make sure symmetry works. So over here, put symmetry on. Okay, that works. Let's go to the eyeballs. That works. And the eye bits. That works. Okay, and I'm just going to drag and drop these textures on top. Okay, that works fine. He's going to have red aluminium eyes. And he's going to have some leather eye bits. And that works fine. So, yeah, it's a shame about that. I should have checked that earlier. And it's not going to be a long fix. I'll just go back in, fix the UVs in rhizome, import it back into ZBrush, and then we're good to go. But let's take a look at the properties here. And let's just test out another smart material just to make sure everything works. So we're making sure that it's reacting to the high poly, and it is, which is good. You can definitely tell that is the low poly by going into this little computer screen, scrolling all the way down and putting wireframes on, and you can see the low poly wireframes, but it looks high poly, which is good. Let's do a quick test render just to make sure everything is all good. Change the panorama to this one because this one's quite nice. And let's get a nice shot. Turn the background off by clicking this button here. Change the focal length to 85, which is nice for portraits. So you can zoom out a bit. And yeah, besides that top part, it's come in perfectly fine, exactly how we want it to be. So if you've got to this point, you've had no issues, just start painting, start texture painting and just have a bit of fun with it. You got about a week to do this. And then we've got to move on to rendering. If there's any issues, then you just need to go back and revisit that mesh that's having the problems and then just fix it and go back through the steps of exporting it out. Thankfully though, once you've done the high poly, and if the high poly has exported out fine, you don't need to ever do that again, because that took me about half an hour, maybe even more. It's just a low poly that we're dealing with now. Okay. So yeah, a bit of a longer video, but hopefully that helps. So I'll see you guys in the next one.